Welcome to hour number 2 on a Monday with hashtag Daily K's host, Peter Bint. Tired of just scratching the surface of Korea? Want to get deep in the weeds?
We unpack everything about Korea through its history on
Now and Then with David. It is the 12th of the 12th. We've got Professor David Tizard in the studio with us. I'm thinking of, I think his name's Professor Langdon from the Da Vinci Code series. You know, that set of books which Tom Hanks plays in the movies. And he's all into his numbers and all those codes. 1212, you're a professor. Are you into this kind of Illuminati? I'm sorry for a random question on a Monday morning, David.
I can answer this. One of my friends, Kevin, he's Korean, but he goes by Kevin, and he's in part of our philosophy club. At a recent meeting, he kept using the term conspiracy theory.
Okay.
But then he used this term, but a real conspiracy theory. And I didn't know whether that meant it was really true or really false. Do you know what I mean by that?
Sure. What are you emphasizing about that?
Yeah. Is it the realness that it's actually real or the realness that it's actually a conspiracy theory and therefore it's false?
Yeah.
I remember the first time I read Da Vinci Code and I was a young man and I decided the internet had just kind of become a thing.
Okay.
And so I would go off and Google the stuff that they were talking about and I'd be like, oh, wow, that's kind of right.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in this.
Yes.
Maybe I, as well, am descended from the bloodline of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and I have this special message for the world, and I got all these messianic thoughts in my head. So I quickly got rid of them.
Yeah, I really got caught up into it. The funny thing is, the guy that recommended that book was Korean. He read it in Korean, like it was translated into so many languages.
Yeah, sure.
And he visited me in London. He was like, have you heard of this book? And I'm not too booky, to be honest, if that's even a word. And then he was like, no, you got to read it. Like, it's amazing. And I picked it up and I was just like you, like Googling everything. Yeah. And thinking, my goodness, you know, there is this cabal running the world. I don't know when I stopped believing that or if I have still believed it to this day, but it was very exciting at the time.
You know when you stop believing it, when you actually meet ambassadors, politicians, diplomats, and you realise that they're not actually that special. You spend time around powerful people, which you have done as well, I'm sure, and you realise they're not actually any different from you or me, Pete.
They're just normal Joe blogs, aren't they? Today's hashtag, before we get into the topic, is CPR or 심폐소생술. Yeah, I can see you're having a headache on this Monday morning. Our writer has gone for a challenging one. Did you ever learn that? Did you ever do your first aid course or anything like that?
Yeah, we did all of those at school. At school we had to do like a riding a bike test, a swimming test.
Yes, I remember swimming in my pajamas.
Swimming in your pajamas, staying afloat, and CPR was another one of them. And filling, pardon the language this time in the morning, listeners, filling condoms up with water to learn how to use them as survival techniques. And it was very much part of the education. But as soon as you said CPR, I must confess, my mind immediately went to the scenes in Itaewon that filled social media, and then Christian Eriksen as well. It's who suffered the heart problems at the last European Championships on the pitch, and so it's a horrible thing to see. I wasn't expecting that. You shocked me there, Pete.
Do apologise. You're right. CPR, I mean, I was thinking all along the lines of education and training, and I think it's really important that everyone does this and kind of does a refresher as well.
Agreed.
I learned more about it when I had my first child. You know, when you're a first-time parent, you're like, I need to know everything just in case, you know. So I looked at all these videos online, and there's different techniques for young kids, right? Because they can't take the same kind of pressure on their rib cage and things like this. And I was thinking, this should surely be mandatory for all people, especially parents, you know, if they choke on something or something like that. But I don't think it is. And maybe in the school curriculum, like you said. But I don't think my youngsters have learned anything. And maybe they're still too young at elementary school. Fingers crossed for the future. They can save daddy or mummy if that ever happens. Today's topic.
Just before we go there, I just want to flesh out CPR just a little bit more, because imagine who first discovered this, because we now live in a relatively secular age with the wonders of modern medicine, and we can do all of these invasive cameras and techniques and look inside the body. Previously, until not very long ago, people believed, and some people do still believe, of course, that, humans are created by God. We have a soul inside us, and when we die, the soul leaves us and such forth. Who, amidst all of that, decided, no, let's apply pressure to this position and then breathe into their mouth, and then we will put the breath of life back in them. The person that first must have done that must have been either crazy, dedicated. I'm not sure, but how that first came about, the first people to do that, I would love to have been a fly on the wall there, because and imagine the first time they saw it work.
Yes.
Because now you take it for granted. You watch people do it in movies, action movies, and there's always that person that's been underwater too long and they're hit in the chest and like, it's not going to work. They're like, come on, God damn it, Jane.
And then suddenly cough.
Suddenly cough and come to life. And we expect it now.
Yes.
We expect it. But imagine the first time it happened. Wow.
That's a really interesting point of view. From your expertise in the history field, going back to the origins, it didn't cross my mind. And I'm sure for many of our listeners it didn't. Yeah, that just sprung a thought into my mind. Maybe the first people who did this, if this was in a religious kind of background, maybe they were feeling like their breath was the breath of God. And, they might have seen this as an extension of religion in some way. Maybe not as well. Interesting. Let's find out about the history of CPR after today's show finishes. Park Chan-wook is today's person in question. I love doing these deep dives on one character in Korean popular culture. I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of him, but just an introduction.
Park Chan-wook 감독님, director Park Chan-wook, he's one of the two main, there might be more, the film buffs will say more, but you can say the name Park Chan-wook to any Korean person. And they will all know who he is, and they will all sort of speak in reverent terms about him. They might not always like his movies, but his undeniable reputation in South Korean society for what he's achieved with his movies, and this goes back a long way. He's been in the industry for more than 2 decades, and we do talk a lot about K-pop. We talk about NCT and aespa and Stray Kids, all the things that they're doing and bringing Korea to the world stage. Park Chan-wook has been doing this for the last 20 years, I think people would argue, and he's been doing it a little bit differently.
Yes.
Now, I know I'm probably going to get some pelters for saying this, but while I say that K-pop has achieved a lot of commercial success, and these groups will often win awards that are voted for on social media,
for sure,
I would suggest that a lot of K-pop hasn't earned critical success. Yeah? And I believe you can look at the awards and say that.
Sure.
But Park Chan-wook, for the last 20 years abroad, he may not have always achieved commercial success. He may not have been making, I don't know, Avatar or the latest Avengers movies. But his movies have been recognized around the world by those in, the positions that matter in the movie industry as, wow, this guy knows how to make films. This guy gets it. And so he's achieved that critical success, which I think is really important alongside, of course, all the beautiful commercial success that K-pop does provide.
That's an interesting kind of dichotomy there, right? I wonder if you went and asked both the K-pop artists and Park Chan-wook himself what they would prefer. I'm feeling Park Chan-wook as an artist would definitely want to take the critical acclaim home. I'm sure he wouldn't mind a few blockbusters and a bigger bank account, but I wonder about the K-pop side. Would they, many of those people, trainees from a young age, prefer to have maybe a Grammy in their cabinet, but not so much global fame and success?
Pete, the K-pop artists don't get to choose, the management does.
There
is a
true.
big difference. And again, I'm not trying to say, but that's the way the industry works. Park Chan-wook is what we call an auteur, which is the French word which comes from the word author. So Park Chan-wook, when he does a movie, he's not working, he is the writer, he is the director, he is the producer. It is his vision, and the film rests and lies. Of course, he collaborates with the artist, but there's a big difference between these. And here we have Park Chan-wook, who is known as an auteur. And I love the fact that you use dichotomy on a Monday morning, Pete. That's very impressive. You got like word of the day toilet paper going on.
I was scrambling around in my brain for the right word, and thank goodness it worked
you got
this
it,
time.
Mate.
It very rarely does, to be honest, though. So his story, because he's come into, again, the headlines not so long ago for the Cannes Film Festival, winning the Best Director Gong, right?
Best Director for his latest movie, Decision to Leave. And Park Chan-wook has a huge reputation at the Cannes Film Festival, going all the way back to the early 2000s with Old Boy as part of that Vengeance trilogy. But yeah, winning Best Director at Cannes is a huge award. And now perhaps going on to the Oscars with this movie, where we've seen Bong Joon-ho, do so well, but Park Chan-wook's back in the news again with his latest movie, Decision to Leave.
Yeah, it does seem like we've presented news from the Cannes Film Festival and some other European film festivals, which aren't as glitzy and glamorous as the Oscars, but a few of them seem to have this kind of penchant for Korean directors and will go back whenever their films are released and at least tip their hats to them in some small way. It's amazing. We kind of take it for granted, I think, right? The other one, I think, is Hong Sang-soo, if I'm not mistaken, and his films, very dialogue heavy, and to be honest, I've watched one or two and they're not my cup of tea, but they seem to always get acclaim, critically speaking.
But let's be real about Bong Joon-ho's movies and Park Chan-wook, who we're talking about today. Their movies are good. They're not just like riding on the Hallyu train by because of what we call in academia the crossover effect, because K-pop is popular now, people are getting into K-food, K-language and things like this. Things like the Cannes Film Festival are not just featuring Korean artists because of a Hallyu crossover effect.
No.
This kind of predates Hallyu.
Yes.
And I don't think they do it out of some kind of Orientalism or fetishization for this Korean thing. It's because these people make excellent movies that stand up to anywhere around the world. And you get directors such as Quentin Tarantino, Spike Lee, they all come out and say, these people are making movies that we wish we were making.
That is maybe the highest form of acclaim from your peers out there, right?
Yeah.
So this story, tell us a bit about it, because I haven't watched it yet, Decision to Leave. I don't know too many of my friends who have spoken about this, but as we said, there are hopes for an Oscar, who knows, the first time since Parasite just a few years back. So it's a big deal.
No, it is a big deal. I must confess, I haven't seen this movie yet because I've been busy, but it's been all over the news. I'm waiting to watch it. And so today, the purpose of today's conversation, by the way, is to get people into Park Chan-wook, not just to describe all his movies to people that have never seen them, because that doesn't work, right? But just to make the listeners go, Park Chan-wook, let me go and Google him. Let me go and watch a movie. That's what I want you to do today, listeners. His latest movie, Decision to Leave, it's about a detective investigating a case of a man who has fallen from a mountain and died. The wife is the primary suspect.
Wow.
The detective investigates the wife and then slowly starts falling in love with her. And that is the movie. This is how Park Chan-wook describes it. And so it's a little bit of a departure from some of his previous work, which has been kind of heavy on certain themes. This is a bit more suspense, bit more of a thriller. We have Tang Wei, a Chinese person, a Chinese actress playing the female lead, and he's been very useful playing with her and her language skills. Yeah.
Wow, I do want to see it. And like you said, it's very different, the plot line, to some of his older stuff, which is a bit more shocking in certain aspects. This seems like a plot that could be from a Hollywood blockbuster or something like that. I wonder if this was a kind of conscious departure from his previous things.
The male star, the detective in this, played Park Hae-il, is described as a wet wipe detective. So
What's that?
A wet wipe, a multish, right? A wet wipe detective. Park Chan-wook described this as, when you watch movies, you see these kind of macho detectives that are breaking down doors.
Russell Crowe, I'm imagining.
Russell Crowe, yeah, it's a bit old school, but yeah, these kind of macho, hyper-masculine, testosterone-fueled detectives. Park Chan-wook wanted to do one that was a bit kind of wet behind the ears and emotional and not that masculine. He was inspired by 90s, 60s Swedish detective models. And so you get this gentler person, very courteous, very kind, and then struggling with all those feelings and emotions of investigating a person with whom he was falling in love.
Welcome to Arirang Radio.
If you are in Jeju,
88.7 in Jeju City,
88.1 in Seogwipo City.
101.9 in the Daejeong area.
Arirang Radio.
Oh, that does bring back memories of watching that for the first time in my house in North Harrow in the UK. My friend brought it over on DVD because all my friends, they know I'm very proud of being half South Korean. And he was like, this is a Korean director. And it was in HMV in like the recommended DVD list. And we had no idea what it was about. We turned it on. It was just me and him on a Friday evening. My parents had gone out. And by the end of it, we just looked at each other so disturbed and kind of shocked. And I was like, I didn't know that's what Korean cinema was about. It was like one of the first movies I'd sat down and watched from Korea. And he was scratching his head, but he said that was brilliant. And I was like, I'm not sure. And I'm still really not sure how I feel about this film. It just made me feel so odd and conflicted inside. And that music, it's brilliant. That kind of OST, as we like to call them in Korea, that really brings back those images from the screen. Shocking images, I must say.
He's used, Park Chan-wook has used the same sound director from his second film onwards, I believe. And so they sit down and they create the soundscapes together. But you're absolutely correct. I even saw Old Boy in the United Kingdom before I even came to Korea or even probably knew what Korea a Korea was at the time. Forgive my ignorance. But it's a film that leaves you shaking your head, but it's so amazing. If you haven't seen Old Boy, do please watch it. It is some example of extreme cinema, but it's not gratuitous. There is artistic merit to the film Old Boy. And this is why we spoke before the break. So now for the next part, we're going to talk about sex and violence, children. Park Chan-wook has been known for using high levels of violence in his movies. And so Old Boy, and he did this Vengeance trilogy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, Lady Vengeance. These films contain sort of knives, axes, eating live octopus, sort of brutal psychological torture. Yeah. And you're probably listening to this going, no, I don't want to watch that. Yeah. But when you see it in context, it's not something that you immediately turn off because you're understanding that there's something happening here. The director is trying to tell you something. Yeah. It's not just going for a shock factor. And I find these things a little bit harder to watch as I get older. But with Park Chan-wook's early films, that exploration of violence, it was definitely something that he was trying to explore. He was trying to tell us something about this, right?
Yeah, it isn't just for violence's sake like you might see in some other movies. And it's very unsettling and disturbing, but it's also drawing you in. What does he have to say about that? Because, Korea as a society is not, especially back then, 20 years ago or so, so forward-thinking and open in terms of having violence on screen, still in the dramas and things like this. There are lots of restraints put on TV, what can be aired there. Was he consciously wanting to put that out there to Koreans, to the greater audience in the world?
Absolutely. So he's been asked so many times about his portrayals of violence, and again, that's why his latest movie with the wet wipe detective Decision to Leave is seen as sort of a departure from his normal work. But when asked about violence, Park Chan-wook has said this, and this I'll quote him now. So Park Chan-wook, quote, "If you look at the history, it's been quite common for politicians to tap into people's hatred towards others. All my films that deal with vengeance essentially talk about how in vain it is to lash out towards people, and there's nothing you can get out of an act of vengeance. Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance deals with the conflict between the classes, and also, even though none of my films talk about the topic of anger or hatred towards women, which does exist in our society, it's important for us to accept the fact that we have this illness. We have to look at it squarely, and that is the only way we can bring about a resolution. That is the power of art."
Oh, wow.
That's beautiful, isn't it, though, Pete? Because he's recognizing, he's not saying his films are creating the problems of society. He's saying we have these problems in society. We have problems between the upper class and the lower class. We have problems towards foreigners and the other. We have problems towards women. And rather than just blame others, it's about, no, let's look at ourselves. Let's talk about this, and let's realize that violence, that vengeance does not bring about the end that we want it to.
Yeah, how it's all in vain. And I guess thinking back to some of those earlier works from that Vengeance trilogy, there's no happy rosy ending, right? After all the violence unfolds, it's not like, oh, that was worth it. Not at all. And that's why you're left kind of empty and stunned at the same time.
That's something that you see over so many with Bong Joon-ho's films and Park Chan-wook's films. I would say the ambiguous protagonist. In many movies, you're sure who the good guy is and the bad guy is. And the bad guy, let's take a classic Western movie or a Bond movie, whatever it might be, in Avengers. The bad guy does the violence and we're like, that's not good.
Yeah.
And the good guy does the violence and we're like, yay, go! And so we celebrate the violence from one person but not the other. When you watch Park Chan-wook's movies and you look at these protagonists, is that a good guy? Is that a bad guy? I'm not sure whether I should be rooting for this person or not. And so by removing that binary idea of there's one side or the other, you're instead forced to look at the concepts and the themes rather than root for a protagonist. And that's the way I see these movies play out a lot, and I love it.
Sure, and that is real life, No one's just straight up an angel or a devil. But like he said, that's amazing to come out and say that, it's common for politicians, not just in Korea, obviously, all around the world, to play people off against one another when it's so much more complex and nuanced than that.
But that's what you want these artists and directors to say. Park Chan-wook doesn't talk in media cliches. He doesn't just come out and say, oh, yeah, I just did my best and I hope it's successful. Thank you very much. I love you all. No, this is an intelligent man with a message behind it. The first time, we'll next talk about how he presents the idea of sex with his movie Agashi, or The Handmaiden in English. I remember watching interviews about this after I'd seen the movie, and here was Park Chan-wook talking in a nuanced way about the Japanese colonial period of Korea, in which he said he said this, Park Chan-wook's words, by the way. He said modernization came to Korea through Japanese colonization, and I just fell off my chair and I was like, you're not allowed to say that in Korean society. Certainly not if you're a public figure.
Sure.
But this is a man that has his own ideas, a very patriotic and intelligent man, but he doesn't speak in cliches, Pete.
He's not afraid to speak his mind, which is, something we do need more of, I think, and not just the Twitter trolls, that is. We need intelligent people like Park Chan-wook doing it. In terms of the sex side of things, The Handmaiden, I was trying to think, there's a bit of a racy scene in Old Boy with somebody that, I don't want to spoil it if you've not seen it.
It's 20 years old. You're allowed to spoil it, Pete.
It turns out to be his daughter. Okay, we'll say that. And that's what really disturbed me throughout that. But in terms of the sex side of things, The Handmaiden, I remember watching that with my wife. And that's a really big theme in that film. I love that film, by the way. That one, it kind of shocks and awes you and everything. But at the end, I was like, that was magnificent.
It's an amazing piece of filmmaking. Park Chan-wook, he just has this ability to, and we'll talk about where that comes from in the next part. We'll talk about how he has this ability, where it comes from. But The Handmaiden, or Agashi, it was based on the 2002 novel Fingersmith, which Sarah Waters, which I highly recommend. I read that before I'd seen the movie.
And that's a great book.
It's a great book. You read Fingersmith and it's a book you can't put down. Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden, his 2016 movie, features the first kiss between two women in Korean cinema.
Oh, wow.
On the main screen.
I did not know that.
It's an internationally acclaimed erotic masterpiece. But again, it's not really it's sexy in an understated way. It's sexy in an erotic way. It's sexy in this kind of very brooding. It's not just, again, like with the violence, it's not just gratuitous, is it? There's a deep reason for this happening the way it does.
That film I really do recommend everybody out there who's of the right age, obviously, go and watch. I'm assuming the book itself, I'm just intrigued because I'm looking for a good audio book, the Sarah Waters one. It's a completely different context, right? It's not in Korea or anything.
No, it's not
that.
Set during that, but I remember there was, I shouldn't, it's 20 years old, so I'm allowed to spoil her a little bit, but I got to one page in that book and I just put it down and went, I can't just believe that happened. I had this, you don't normally get that with books, but there was this thing that happened and I was like, oh and that's what you want. You don't want to be able to predict everything. The Handmaiden, Park Chan-wook has come out and said that the community of fans that's come around for that movie in particular, it's something that we normally associate with K-pop idols, but there's fan fiction, there's fan art, there's communities, there's bulletin boards. That movie really struck a chord with so many people. And in the Yongsan CGV down here in the middle of
That's
Seoul,
a huge one.
They've dedicated one of their theaters in Park's honor to that movie. So
wow.
one of the theaters in that downtown middle of Seoul is decorated with the art and the themes of that particular movie. So yeah, it didn't win an Oscar or something like that, but the movie was critically acclaimed and everyone that's seen it remembered it. So to the listeners, if you haven't seen The Handmaiden, you'll learn a lot about Korean history and you'll learn a lot about how Korean people tell stories and make movies because it's just so fantastic.
You tuned in to Monday's edition of Hashtag Daily K Now and Then with David Tizard talking all about the film director Park Chan-wook. And we've talked about a few of his big successes in terms of The Handmaiden and Old Boy. But who is Park? What made him this way? I'm really curious because if you watch some of his films, you might be, I don't know if this is just a kind of stereotype, but you might just be worried about this person's mental well-being, thinking, is this all that's going on in his head? Like when I saw Old Boy, I was really like, wow, who made this?
It was based on a Japanese webtoon, Old Boy, by the way. It didn't come from him, but he adapted it just like he adapted Handmaiden. So just before we get into Park, because I realised there's something we've forgotten. We've talked about his wet wipe detective. We've talked about his portrayals of violence. We've talked about his portrayals of sex. He doesn't just stop there, Pete. He hits all the big issues. He also made probably one of my favourite Korean movies, Joint Security Area, JSA, which looks at relationships with North Korea. So he even gets into politics. Listeners, if you haven't seen Joint Security Area, you know who Lee Byung-hyun is, you know who Song Kang-ho is, and now you know who Park Chan-wook is. Those three legends coming together, making perhaps, it's such a good movie.
Yeah, a few of our listeners have mentioned that film. I'm thinking in particular of Raul from Argentina, who says one of his all-time favourite movies.
Good.
And now you lay it out like that, he really goes everywhere, Park Chan-wook, right, in terms of the topic matter.
But that's so important because
brilliant,
he has the freedom. He's not trying to get commercial success. He's trying to do the things that are important to him. Now, excuse me, you asked who is Park. He studied philosophy at university and he wanted to be an art critic.
Okay.
He knew that being a film director was not a viable career for a Korean at his time. When he proposed to his wife in the late 1980s, he lied to his future mother-in-law by saying he was going to be a professor.
Okay.
He's like, oh, yes, of course, I'm going to go into academia and be a professor and be a reputable person.
All in-laws would love that.
All in-laws would love that in Korea. But he lied to get the hand of his beloved because he needed to make movies. When people spend time with him in the various interviews where they write about his character, I've not had the opportunity to... Have you met Park Chan-wook?
No.
Okay, I wasn't
sure. That would be an honour.
Yes, exactly. But they describe him as having the air of a prince in exile. Very reserved person with a hint of laughter behind his ears. But different people carry themselves in different ways. And Park Chan-wook is perhaps a bit different from why have I got his name all of a sudden? Bong Joon-ho. Sorry, who's more exuberant, who's more jovial, and animated. Park Chan-wook is the opposite. They're great friends, but Park Chan-wook is the reserved, kind of regal and more erudite person.
A bit of mystery adding to another layer of him. So he studied philosophy. How did he get into filmmaking? Did he learn it at university or something?
There was no film culture in Korea, and there are great interviews with Park Chan-wook and Bong Joon-ho online where they talk about growing up. But you will remember this. In Korea, there was the only AFN, the American Forces Network, where you could watch movies. There was no chance to go to school and study it. And so he's self-taught.
Wow.
And maybe that's why he's so good, because he didn't go to school and study this. He didn't get taught this is how you make movies, but rather he learned how to make movies by watching them, by discussing them, and then really applying his own vision of how they should be made. And he says maybe that's why he has this kind of slapdash approach to everything, because there was no systematic learning. Another beautiful thing about this is when he was watching movies, and he recalls watching James Bond as a young boy. And he didn't understand what was happening because it was all in a different language. But what he did understand was the people's faces and their eyes and the way they communicated. And all he's tried to do, he said since then, is, okay, I need to make movies where I convey people's faces and their eyes. It doesn't matter so much about the words because I can't understand the words. And there's that wonderful quote that I think is sometimes attributed to Maya Angelou, which is, people will often not remember what you say, but they'll always remember how you make them feel. And when you watched Oldboy, it made you feel something.
Yes.
And when you watched The Handmaiden, it made you feel something. So Park Chan-wook, he's based on how we grew up watching movies, he's always trying to make other people feel something.
Wow, and that's really interesting, not through the language and the intricacies of that. And I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but yeah, what stays with me from all his films, the Handmaiden and the Old Boy in particular, are the images, are the way it makes you feel. And I don't want to say this because it might be wrong, but I don't feel like they were too dialogue heavy. Like there was a lot of the film where nothing was being said. It's just a lot of the music and a lot of the scenery that really impacted you on the screen. So he really, in my opinion, achieved what he's saying there, you know, making people feel a certain way. Maybe the language not so important, just the shots and things like this.
Can I put on my old man shouts at a cloud hat just for 1 second, which is a lot of people these days love to watch things with the subtitles on. This is what the Flicks has done to us. And even on YouTube now, the autoplay.
Yeah.
And so even if you're watching something in your own language, whether it be Spanish, it be English, Senegalese, people are putting the subtitles on.
Just in case kind of thing.
Well, because you don't want to miss anything, because you want to have everything, but that removes the ambiguity. And the other very important thing, it stops you looking at people's faces. It stops you looking at the emotion. And we're going further and further away from this. So my old man shouts at the cloud moment here, just for this, is listeners, turn your subtitles off. Just try it and just look. And if you miss something, maybe you were meant to miss it. And maybe you were meant to then go back and watch it again later. You're not always meant to have everything. We're not computers. Go with the vagueness and the ambiguity, because then your imagination and you as a person, you fill in the gaps, and then you become an author of that movie as well.
It does become such a subconscious distraction if the subtitles are there. Your eyes can't help but be drawn to it. It's a good bit of advice, especially if you're watching, like you said, in your own language. If it's another language, of course, that's understandable, right? To have the translated subtitles. It might be worthwhile to go and watch it without understanding the kind of language as well one time. He's done films then since when? Because like 2002 was when a lot of people came across him. Perhaps.
That's when he started the Vengeance trilogy, and when he started getting big. But since 1992, he's directed 10 feature films, and he doesn't show any signs of slowing down at the moment. He's still going. When he did start out, though, his first film was so unsuccessful that he was the only person that reviewed it. Park Chan-wook was the only person that reviewed the first Park Chan-wook film. And he did so in disguise. You know, he had to use a pen name, a pseudonym. But, you know, he couldn't do it. And when his second film also struggled and didn't really do anything, he began to think that maybe the whole industry was against him and they're trying to ridicule him. And he believed everyone was conspiring to get him. And he really believed the world was against him at that stage. But yet he persevered. And despite those first two setbacks, right, huge setbacks, he didn't stop. I think, listeners, there's an important lesson there for you, that the people that do achieve greatness, it's because they persevere with something in which they believe. They don't change. They don't sort of say, well, no, it must be I'm wrong and society's right. No, Park Chan-wook stuck to his guns and he realized, yes, this is down now, but eventually he became what he became because he believed in himself.
Yeah, if you really do have courage in your convictions and you're sure that what you're doing is good or right, even if you don't get mainstream success, you know, as long as you don't give up, you're doing something that you're passionate about. But luckily, it all changed for Park Chan-wook with his third film.
The third film, JSA, which we've already mentioned, but this is where some of his filmmaking approach really came to the fore, because he began talking to the actors, and he began, you know, with Lee Byung-yeon, with Song Kang-ho and the other cast. They would shoot until nighttime, and then they would spend all night drinking and talking about what they should do. And he would be asking these greats of Korean cinema, these people that have achieved in their own right so much success, what should the person say there? What should the person be doing? And this is where he got this collaborative approach. And his films are now built out of conversations with the core crew.
Oh, wow.
And so he's always asking these people, how would you talk? What would you say? Because Park Chan-wook is the director, he's the auteur, he's the producer, he's the man that all makes it happen, but he needs the people to speak. And if you've got someone like Song Kang-ho in front of you, that guy knows how to speak.
Sure.
He knows how to deliver lines. And so that was not only a huge breakout movie for him, but it was also part of this collaborative approach where he gives the actors a voice and he allows them to speak as they want.
Yeah, I have heard there are some directors out there, not necessarily in Korea, but they're very strict about what they want. They want it their way or the highway. But I do feel that surely you could get more out of collaborating with especially experienced, fine actors. He talked about politicians a little bit when we read that quote earlier, about how politics is often trying to put you off against somebody else. But there are some motivations behind his work that might be shared by other directors of a similar age as well.
Yeah, Hwang Dong-hyuk and Bong Joon-ho and Park Chan-wook, all of them are very vocal about growing up during the 1980s under a military regime where freedoms were restricted, and that being why they are who they are and the movies that they make, where they explore issues of class struggle, of sex and violence, because that was forbidden from them. And so maybe that's why they explore them. And so Park Chan-wook, he's a movie director, yes, but he's also an historian. He is documenting Korean history. So, we talk about these things here through history, but you can understand also a lot of Korean history through Park Chan-wook's movies. He's trying to make movies that will last forever. That's his goal. He's trying to make movies that you watch 2, 3, 4 or 5 times. He's not sure whether he'll succeed, but everybody, if you want to learn more about Korea, don't just listen to the amazing Peter Bint. Go and watch some Park Chan-wook movies.
Absolutely a fantastic recommendation to finish off on. David, as ever, thanks for our deep dive this Monday. We'll see you again next week.
See you. Thank you for the dive.
You can listen to Monday's segment Now and Then with David Tizard every Monday from 10 a.m. KST on #DailyK.